Caleb Ward woke before sunrise, the way he always did. The ranch was quiet at that hour, with only the soft rustle of wind moving across the dry grass. The sky still held the last traces of night, and a faint line of orange touched the horizon. Caleb moved through his small wooden house, with slow and steady steps, like a man used to working alone. He washed his face with cold water, tied his worn boots, and checked his gear. Today he planned to hunt not for sport, but because winter would come soon, and he needed to fill his storehouse. He saddled his horse, a calm bay mare named Willow, and rubbed her neck as she snorted softly. Caleb spoke to her in a gentle voice. He had no one else to speak to at that hour, and Willow was the closest thing to company he had most days. When he finished strapping down his supplies, he rode out across the open land. His father had once told him that the land remembered every footstep, and as Caleb rode, he felt that truth. The hills, the red rocks, the dry creek beds. He knew them like old friends. The morning air was cool, and the ground still held the night's cold. Caleb followed a narrow trail leading into the hills, watching the soil for tracks. He found prints from deer, not fresh, but fresh enough to follow. He guided Willow forward and listened closely for any sound out of place. The silence around him was peaceful, but he stayed alert. Life on the frontier taught people to pay attention to the smallest sign. After about an hour, he stopped near a rocky ridge. He dismounted and crouched beside a set of prints. He could tell the deer had passed through sometime after dawn. It was a good sign. Caleb stood, brushed dust off his hands, and continued on foot to avoid making too much noise. Willow stayed behind, grazing on a patch of dry grass. As he moved deeper into the hills, he heard something faint, something he almost thought he imagined. It sounded like a soft cry, carried lightly by the wind. Caleb froze and listened. At first, he wondered if it was an injured animal, maybe a coyote caught in a trap or a deer tangled in brush. But the sound came again, very soft, very human. Caleb felt a quiet tension rise in his chest. He had learned long ago that unexpected sounds in the hills could mean anything. He stepped carefully toward the direction of the noise, moving between tall rocks and leaning shrubs. The cry came again, a little clearer this time. It was a woman's voice, pained, tired, and scared. He followed the sound until he reached a spot where a fallen tree lay across the ground. Behind it, near a patch of broken branches, he saw someone lying on the dirt. It was a young Apache woman. Her dark hair was tangled, her clothes covered with dust. One hand clutched her ankle, and her eyes held a mix of fear and exhaustion. Caleb stayed still for a moment, not wanting to frighten her more. He knew many settlers and Apache families lived with mistrust between them. People on both sides had been hurt before, and fear passed from one generation to the next. He spoke gently, so she would know he meant no harm. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I'm not here to trouble you. Are you hurt?" When she saw him step forward, she tried to push herself back, but her injured ankle made her wince sharply. Her breathing grew fast, and she looked around as if expecting someone else to appear. Caleb understood her fear. A lone woman in the hills would not trust a stranger easily, especially a rancher. He crouched a few feet away to show he wasn't a threat. "I just want to help," he said quietly. "I won't touch you, unless you say it's all right." The woman swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "My ankle. I fell. My horse ran off. I can't walk." Caleb nodded slowly. "May I look at it?" "You can tell me to stop any time." "Bye." She hesitated, her eyes narrowing with caution. Finally, she gave a very small nod. He moved closer, careful and respectful. When he examined her ankle, he realized it was badly twisted and swollen. She must have been lying there for hours. Caleb tore a clean strip of cloth from his shirt and wrapped it firmly but gently around her ankle. She watched his hands closely, as if expecting roughness, but he kept his touch steady and light. "Can you stand?" he asked. She tried to put weight on it, but the pain made her gasp. Caleb caught her elbow to keep her from falling. You won't make it far like this, he said softly. It's safer at my ranch. I can give you food and water and send word to your people. I know a man named Taza. He'll help explain everything. The woman shook her head at first, afraid. The idea of going with a stranger frightened her, and her community had warned her many times to avoid ranchers and settlers whenever possible. But she also knew she could not walk alone through the hills with an injured ankle. The desert was not kind to the weak or wounded. Caleb saw the conflict in her eyes. He did not try to rush her decision. He waited patiently, giving her space to think. After a while, she spoke again, her voice quiet. If you mean no harm, then help me to your horse. She did not say she trusted him. Not fully. But she was giving him a chance. Caleb lifted her gently in his arms. She tensed immediately, her hands gripping his shoulders. But he kept his voice calm. I've got you. You're safe. He carried her slowly toward Willow, making sure she didn't feel jolted or shaken. When they reached the horse, he helped her settle into the saddle. She winced, but managed to hold on. Caleb walked beside her, guiding the horse carefully down the hills. The journey back to the ranch took time. The woman stayed quiet most of the way, watching everything around her, as if expecting danger. Caleb didn't push her to talk. Instead, he walked in silence, letting the steady footsteps of the horse fill the air. Every so often he glanced up to make sure she was all right, and she would lower her eyes quickly, unsure how to react. When they finally reached the ranch, Caleb helped her down and supported her across the yard. His small house stood simple and plain wooden walls, a stone chimney, and a porch with 2 chairs. He led her inside and gave her water first, then heated a small pot of broth. She accepted the cup with both hands and drank slowly, still watching him, as if trying to understand his intentions. He brought a blanket for her to rest on and made sure her ankles stayed elevated. She finally spoke, after several minutes of silence. My name is Nalin. Caleb nodded. I'm Caleb Ward. Nalin's eyes moved around the room, taking in the tools, the shelves, the lanterns. She was alert, careful, but no longer trembling with fear. Caleb didn't crowd her or try to make her talk more. He simply tended to his chores in a slow, easy rhythm, so she would see he had no hidden plan. As the sun lowered in the sky, the day felt calmer than he expected. Caleb checked her ankle once more, gently adjusting the cloth to keep it secure. Nalin watched his hands again, but something in her expression had changed. She still didn't fully trust him, but she no longer looked like she expected harm. Caleb knew their meeting would change something, maybe only for today, maybe for longer. In a land where people often feared one another, simple kindness could feel strange and unexpected. He didn't know what would happen next or how her people might react. But he did know one thing clearly. Leaving her alone in the hills would have been wrong. Their story began not with grand plans, but with a quiet, simple moment. One cry for help, one choice to stop, and one step toward trust. Neither of them expected that morning. Nalin woke the next morning to the soft crackling of a small fire. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The room was unfamiliar, yet peaceful, with sunlight slipping gently through the shutters. Then she remembered the fall, the pain in her ankle, and Caleb carrying her through the hills. She sat up slowly, careful not to move her injured foot too much. Caleb was by the stove, stirring a pot with quiet focus. He glanced over as soon as she shifted, as if he had been listening for any sign she was awake. You slept well, I hope, he said, in a calm voice. Nalin nodded. She was still cautious, but she no longer felt the sharp fear she had felt in the hills. She studied him again, the way he moved, steady and patient, keeping space between them so she would not feel cornered. She appreciated that more than she could express. "Is your ankle hurting?" he asked. "Not as much as yesterday," she replied. Caleb brought her a cup of warm tea. She smelled herbs in it, simple ones, nothing strong. He placed it on a small table within her reach and stepped back again. Nalin noticed that he never made sudden moves, never tried to come too close. The restraint showed more respect than words could. After she finished the tea, Caleb checked the bandage around her ankle. He spoke softly as he worked, so she wouldn't feel startled. The swelling had gone down a little, but she still wouldn't be walking without support for several days. "You'll need more help than I can give with just bandages," he said. "I sent a message to Taza. He's someone your people trust. He'll come and talk to your family so they don't worry." Nalin's expression softened. She knew Taza, an older Apache man, who traded medicine, herbs, and leather goods with nearby settlers. If Taza came, it meant Caleb truly wanted to clear any misunderstanding. "You sent for him last night?" she asked. "As soon as I got my horse settled," Caleb answered. "Didn't want anyone thinking something happened to you." His voice held no pride or expectation of thanks, just quiet honesty. Nalin didn't reply, but her eyes told him she understood more deeply than she could say. The day passed slowly, each hour marked by simple routines. Caleb worked around the ranch, fixing tools, stacking wood, feeding the animals. Nalin watched him through the window, studying the way he moved through his duties with calm discipline. She found it strange how safe she felt here, even though she was away from her people. Every time Caleb returned to check on her, she noticed he approached the same way, slow steps, gentle tone, careful distance. Around noon, he brought her a bowl of stew and sat across from her at the table. Nalin was used to eating with company around her, but she didn't mind the quiet with Caleb. He wasn't a man who talked too much. And she liked that. Some people filled the air with noise, but he let silence do its work. After a long moment, Nalin finally asked, "You live alone here?" Caleb nodded. "Been that way a few years now. My father passed, and most folks moved on to bigger towns. Hard life out here." She sensed a different pain behind his words, not sharp, but old, like something he had learned to live with. She understood grief well. Her own family had lost people too. She didn't press him, but she met his eyes with quiet sympathy. Caleb looked away first, not because he felt embarrassed, but because he wasn't used to being seen so clearly. By early afternoon, clouds began to gather in the sky. The wind grew stronger, carrying the smell of rain. Nalin shifted uncomfortably. Storms often brought sudden trouble in the desert lands. Caleb noticed her worry. "Don't worry," he said. "The house is sturdy. You'll be safe here." He checked the windows, made sure the shutters were secure, and placed extra firewood inside before the storm hit. When the rain finally came, it came fast, hard drops pounding against the roof and walls. Lightning flashed across the sky, and distant thunder rolled between the hills. Nalin had faced storms before, but sitting injured in an unfamiliar place made her uneasy. Caleb saw her grip the blanket tightly. "You're safe," he repeated gently. "Nothing's going to harm you here." His voice, calm and steady, eased her tension. She relaxed slightly, though she kept listening to the thunder outside. Since they could not do anything outside, Caleb stayed inside to keep her company. He sat at the table, carving a small piece of wood, while Nalin rested on the nearby chair. At first, they stayed silent, listening to the rain. Then Nalin began telling him small things about herself. How she learned healing herbs from her grandmother. How she helped her people gather roots and berries during certain seasons. How she enjoyed watching the sky turn red at sunset. Caleb listened with interest. He rarely met anyone who spoke with such respect for the land. Her stories carried a deep connection. One he understood, though from another angle. When it was his turn, he told her about caring for the ranch after his father passed. The long days fixing fences. The quiet nights when the wind made the house feel too big for one person. He didn't share everything, but he shared enough to let her see the kind of man he was. The storm continued for hours, trapping them inside. They talked more as the day grew darker. Nalin found herself forgetting the pain in her ankle and the distance between their worlds. Caleb wasn't like the men she had been warned about. He listened more than he spoke and treated her with a gentle respect she did not expect from a stranger. At one point, lightning lit the whole sky, followed by a loud crack of thunder that made the house shake slightly. Nalin jumped, grabbing the side of the chair. Caleb didn't touch her, he knew better, but he spoke quietly. "It'll pass soon. Storms always do." His calm presence helped her breathe easier. As evening approached, the storm finally softened. The rain slowed to a gentle tapping on the roof. Caleb lit a lantern, filling the room with warm light. Nalin glanced toward the window, and then at him. "You could have left me there," she said quietly. "In the hills." Caleb paused for a moment before answering. "I couldn't do that. No decent person would." "Some would," she whispered. Caleb didn't argue. He simply said, "Well, I'm not one of them." His tone carried no boasting, just a simple truth. Later, Caleb stepped outside briefly to check the yard. When he returned, he found Nalin looking thoughtful, almost troubled. She shifted, as if debating whether to speak. Caleb waited patiently, knowing she was someone who chose her words carefully. "I still don't understand why you helped me," she finally said. "Your people and mine, they don't always trust each other." Caleb sat down across from her again. "Trust starts somewhere," he replied. "A moment, a choice, something small. Maybe this is one of those moments." Nalin didn't smile, but her expression softened in a way that felt almost like one. She lowered her gaze, feeling a strange warmth inside her chest. She had never expected kindness from a stranger like Caleb, not this kind of kindness. Before she could reply, a soft knock sounded on the door. Caleb rose, surprised. When he opened the door, he found Taza standing there, rain clinging to his coat. His weathered face looked concerned, but he relaxed when he saw Nalin safe inside. "You found her," Taza said to Caleb. "She was hurt," Caleb replied. "I did the best I could." Taza stepped inside and examined Nalin's ankle with practiced care. He nodded slowly. "You did well," he said to Caleb. Then he turned to Nalin. "Your family has been worried. They searched for you until nightfall." Nalin looked down, feeling a mix of relief and guilt. "I didn't mean to get separated," she said. "You survived," Taza said gently. "That is what matters." He looked at Caleb again, studying him. Taza had trusted the rancher before, but seeing Nalin sitting calmly in his home made him respect Caleb even more. "We will tell your family you are safe," Taza said. "But with the storm, we cannot travel tonight. We will return tomorrow." Caleb nodded. "She can stay here until then." Nalin felt a strange sadness settle in her chest, relief that her family would know she was alive. But an unexpected tug of something else, too. Something she couldn't name. As Taza prepared to leave, he said to Caleb, "Your kindness will be remembered." Caleb simply bowed his head slightly, uncomfortable with praise. When the door closed again, Nalin looked toward the fire, then back at Caleb. She didn't speak, but the silence between them felt different now. Softer, warmer, filled with something unspoken. Their meeting had started with fear and pain. Yet now, it was turning into something deeper. A quiet understanding that neither of them had expected when the day began. The days after Nalin returned to her village passed quietly for Caleb, yet he felt their weight more than usual. The ranch chores were the same: feeding cattle, repairing fences, checking the well, but something had changed inside him. Every time he walked past the chair where she had rested, or the window where she had watched the storm, he remembered the sound of her voice, the small questions she had asked, the way she had slowly begun to trust him. He didn't know what he expected. Maybe he simply thought their paths would never cross again. Life on the frontier rarely allowed long connections between strangers. But Nalin stayed in his thoughts. Not in a way that troubled him, but in a way that made the quiet seem louder than before. A week later, Caleb rode to the trading post to restock flour and nails. He wasn't thinking about anything special when he stepped inside the wooden building, dust clinging to his boots. Then he saw her. Nalin stood beside a shelf stacked with woven baskets, her hair braided neatly down her back, her ankle wrapped but healing well. She was speaking softly to the storekeeper's wife when she suddenly turned and her eyes met Caleb's. For a moment, both simply stared. Nalin's expression softened first. She gave him a small, almost shy smile, and something warm and unspoken passed between them. Caleb nodded politely, but inside, he felt something settle, like a weight he hadn't known he was carrying lifting off him. Nalin walked toward him slowly, testing her ankle with each step. "You're here for supplies?" she asked, her voice calm and gentle. "Yes," Caleb said, feeling suddenly aware of his dust-covered clothes and messy hair. "Just the usual." "I am glad your ranch is still standing after the storm," she said lightly. He smiled. "Barely. Lost one old fence post. I thought you might have lost more." "I had help," he replied softly. "The storm passed fast." Nalin nodded. But she held his gaze a little longer than necessary before turning back to her group. Caleb bought what he needed and stepped outside. But before he mounted his horse, he heard soft footsteps behind him. Nalin approached again, this time standing closer than before. "My family thanks you," she said. "Not just for helping me, but for calling Taza. That meant a lot." "You deserve to go home safely," Caleb replied. "That's all I wanted." Nalin hesitated as if wanting to say more, but then one of her people called her name. She gave Caleb a last small smile and left. The moment was brief, yet it stayed with him for days. After that, their paths crossed more often than either expected. Sometimes, Caleb went to the creek to check for water levels, and Nalin happened to be there gathering plants. Other times she walked with a small group near the hills, and Caleb would pass by on horseback. Each meeting brought quiet conversations, simple words, small updates, gentle exchanges that carved a connection neither had planned. One afternoon, when the sun cast long shadows across the dry grass, Caleb noticed something unusual. A group of Apache riders approached his ranch, 3 men and Nalin among them. Caleb stepped outside, ready to offer any help they might need. To his surprise, Nalin smiled when she saw him. "We came to warn you," she said. "A storm is coming again, stronger than the last. The river will rise." Caleb frowned. The sky looked clear, but he trusted her people's instincts. "I'll move the cattle to the ridge." "We can help," her brother said. Caleb blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected an offer like that. He looked at Nalin, who nodded gently. "It is safer if we all work together," she said. Caleb accepted the help, though part of him felt amazed that they trusted him enough to offer it. Together, they worked quickly, moving cattle from the low fields, reinforcing the barn doors, tying down anything loose that might blow away. Nalin stayed near Caleb most of the time, giving advice and watching the sky closely. As they worked side by side, Caleb began to notice more details about her, how focused she was, how she stayed calm, even when others became anxious, how she gave quiet instructions that others listened to without question. She moved gracefully despite her healing ankle, her eyes sharp and aware of every change in the wind. At one point, a nervous calf nearly slipped near a muddy patch. Caleb rushed forward to grab it, but Nalin was already there, speaking softly to the frightened animal, guiding it back up the slope with gentle confidence. Caleb watched in admiration. "You're good with them," he said. "I learned from my grandmother," she replied. She said all creatures respond to calm voices. Seems she was right. Nalin smiled, and a quiet warmth spread between them. When they finished securing everything, the first gusts of wind arrived, Her group prepared to leave, but Nalin lingered behind for a moment. Caleb felt his heart beat a little faster when she stepped closer. "You always work alone," she said softly. "It must feel heavy sometimes." He shrugged. "I'm used to it." "Being used to something doesn't mean it is easy," she replied quietly. Her words settled inside him like a quiet truth. He didn't answer, but she didn't need him to. She simply understood. The storm hit just after they left. Caleb stayed inside, listening to the strong winds push against the house. He felt grateful for the help they had given, and strangely comforted by Nalin's presence that afternoon. The next day, after the storm passed, Nalin and her brother returned to help inspect the damage. They walked the ranch together, checking fence lines and fallen branches. At one point, Nalin stood on the ridge, looking out across the land where the sunlight reflected off the wet earth. "This place is beautiful," she said. Caleb looked at her. "Not the land." "It is when you're here," he said, before he realized he had spoken aloud. Nalin turned to him, surprised, and a faint flush warmed her cheeks. She lowered her eyes briefly, then looked back at him with a soft expression that made Caleb's heart twist in a way he didn't expect. They walked slowly down the ridge. Nalin talked about her family, her hopes, the small dreams she had never shared with anyone outside her community. Caleb listened with deep attention, feeling honored by her trust. "Most settlers fear us," Nalin said. "They hear stories and think we are dangerous." "Most fear what they don't know," Caleb replied. "But I met you, and now I know better." Nalin smiled lightly. "And some of my people fear settlers," she admitted. "But I met you, and now I know better too." Their steps slowed until they weren't really walking anymore. Later, as she prepared to leave, Nalin placed a small pouch in Caleb's hand. "For your cuts," she said. "It's medicine." He opened the pouch and saw herbs carefully mixed and wrapped. Caleb wasn't used to receiving gifts, especially from people outside his own world. He looked at her with a gentle seriousness. "Thank you," he said. "It's a small thing," she replied, but her voice held an emotion deeper than the words. When she rode away, Caleb watched until she disappeared into the trees. He didn't understand everything happening between them. Not yet, but he knew something was growing. Something built on respect, kindness, and a soft, steady warmth. That night, as he sat by the fire, Caleb realized that Nalin had become more than just a stranger he helped. She was someone who brought peace into the quiet spaces of his life. Someone who made the ranch feel less empty. Someone whose presence felt like a sunrise after a long, cold night. And he wondered quietly, carefully, whether their unexpected connection was becoming the beginning of something far more meaningful than either of them had imagined. Weeks turned into months, and life slowly returned to its steady rhythm on Caleb's ranch. But even with all the daily chores, nothing felt quite the same anymore. Every sunrise reminded him of the morning he found Nalin. Every quiet evening made him remember the sound of her soft voice. Sometimes he tried to push the thoughts away, telling himself that their lives were too different, their worlds too far apart. But every time he rode past the hills where he found her injured, he felt an ache in his chest, a reminder that something had changed the moment he lifted her into his arms. And Nalin felt the same. Back in her village, she often found herself thinking about Caleb at unexpected times, when she ground herbs in the morning, when she watched the sky turn orange at dusk, when she walked past the creek where they once spoke. Her grandmother noticed it first. The old woman would smile quietly when she saw Nalin stare at the horizon. But she never said anything. She simply waited, giving her granddaughter space to understand her own heart. One cool morning, Nalin found a reason to visit his ranch again. She carried a small bundle of herbs, saying they were for him in case he had any cuts or bruises from work. But deep inside, she knew the herbs were only an excuse. She wanted to see him. When she reached the ranch, Caleb was repairing a fence post near the barn. He looked up when he heard her call his name, And the way his expression softened told her everything he had missed her too. "You didn't have to come all this way," he said as he wiped sweat from his brow. "I wanted to," she replied honestly. He took the bundle of herbs gently, as if it were something precious. "Thank you." They stood there for a moment in comfortable quiet. Then Nalin looked out over the land. "Your ranch is beautiful today," she said softly. "It always feels better when you're here," he admitted. Her heart warmed at the honesty in his voice. She didn't laugh or blush. She only smiled. A small but meaningful smile that he felt deep inside. As the days continued, Nalin began visiting more often, sometimes with family members, sometimes alone. Her people had started to trust Caleb in a way they rarely trusted outsiders. The elders saw the respect in Caleb's actions and heard the way he spoke about Nalin with quiet admiration. He never claimed ownership, never pushed boundaries. He simply cared, and that mattered more than anything. One evening, Nalin's father decided to visit the ranch himself. He wanted to see the man his daughter spoke of, the man who had carried her through the hills, kept her safe, and treated her with dignity. Nalin rode beside him, both feeling nervous in different ways. Caleb saw them coming and stepped outside to greet them. The father dismounted first, his posture firm but not hostile. His eyes studied Caleb with the seriousness of a man who had seen the world change too many times. Caleb bowed his head respectfully. "Sir," he said, "welcome. You are the man who helped my daughter," the father said in a steady tone. "I did what anyone should do." Caleb replied calmly. "Not anyone would," the father answered. He walked around the ranch carefully, examining the place, observing how Caleb lived. Every so often he nodded, as if silently approving of the cleanliness, the order, and the safety of the home. Nalin stayed near Caleb, watching both men carefully. She hoped they would understand each other. Finally, the father spoke again. "Your house is strong. A good place for someone to rest." Caleb nodded. "Thank you. You work hard. This land is not kind to weak hands. I do my best." The father looked at Nalin, then at Caleb. "My daughter says you respected her, that you spoke to her with calm words and open hands." Caleb swallowed, unsure how to respond. Nalin's cheeks warmed slightly. "That is true," Caleb said softly. "She deserved no less." The father's expression softened for the first time. "Many settlers have forgotten how to treat others with honor. But you have not." They stood in silence for a moment. The father breathed deeply before speaking again. "Nalin has changed since the day she met you. She looks toward the hills often. She listens in a different way. Her heart has opened in a direction I did not expect." Caleb felt his pulse quicken. The father placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "You must choose your path wisely, Nalin. Two worlds do not join easily." "I know," she whispered. He turned back to Caleb. "If you care for her, you must prove it with your actions, not only your words." Caleb nodded respectfully. "I intend to." The father studied him one last time, then gave a slow nod of approval. It was not a promise, nor a full blessing, but it was acceptance. And for Caleb, it meant more than anything he had hoped for. After her father and the elders left, Nalin remained behind for a few minutes. The sun was lowering behind the barn, painting the sky with shades of gold and soft pink. She stepped closer to Caleb, her voice gentle. "They trust you," she said, "and so do I." Caleb looked at her with quiet emotion. "I'm glad." There was a calm between them, warm and peaceful. They didn't rush to fill it with words. Instead, they walked together across the ranch, listening to the soft wind and the distant sound of cattle. Caleb showed her the small garden he was trying to grow. Nalin knelt beside the soil, her fingers brushing the young sprout. "It will grow strong," she said. Even land as dry as this can give life, if cared for. Caleb looked at her. I think the same is true for people. Nalin felt her heart flutter. She stood slowly, facing him. The soft light of sunset made her eyes shine. I did not expect my life to change the day you found me, she said quietly. But it did. Mine changed too, he replied. They stood close. The moment feeling delicate, but meaningful. Caleb didn't reach for her. He respected her space. But Nalin stepped closer on her own, closing the distance with her calm, steady presence. She looked up into his eyes, searching for something she now knew she would find there: truth, kindness, and respect. I feel safe with you, she said, and I will always make sure you are. Caleb answered. Her hand brushed lightly against his, an unintentional touch that lingered for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Caleb didn't move, afraid he might break the moment. But Nalin didn't pull away. Instead, she let her fingers rest on his for a quiet second before lowering her hand again. As twilight deepened, Nalin knew she had to return to her village. But she didn't leave with uncertainty this time. She left with understanding. Something real was forming between them slowly, respectfully, without pressure. Before climbing onto her horse, she turned back to Caleb and said softly, "This is not the end of our story." Caleb's voice held calm certainty. "No, it's the beginning." She rode away, her figure becoming smaller against the fading light. But Caleb didn't feel the emptiness he once felt when she left. Instead, he felt hope, quiet, steady, real. Their bond had begun with fear and injury, grown through storms and shared work, and now stood on the foundation of trust between two worlds. It was not perfect, and the future would not be simple. But something strong had taken root, like a stubborn wildflower growing in hard desert soil. And as the stars began to appear above the ranch, Caleb knew one thing clearly. The day he set out to hunt had brought him something far more important than he ever expected. He had found Nalin, and she had transformed his life in ways he was only beginning to understand.